Alright, guys, so what we're going to do today is talk about the Chinese Civil War. Because one of the things that we're going to have to, that's going to be building up throughout this early stage of the Cold War is the question of who lost China. So far, we've been dealing with kind of some theoretical stuff, some more doctrinal stuff, some ideas of, okay, the US v. the Soviet Union. But one thing that you've got to remember about the Cold War, it's not as simple as that. The United States and the Soviet Union would have certainly liked it to have been what they would have called a bipolar world. And what we mean by bipolar world is the idea that it revolves around two poles, the United States and the Soviet Union. And that, these two nations are the only ones that are actually competing. But the fact is, the entrance of communist China as a world power will change that, because now you have a dynamic, the United States versus the communist powers. So direct struggles between the Soviet Union and China, but also competition between the Soviet Union and China for who's going to be, the actual leader of international communism. So what I want to do is start talking about the Chinese Civil War, how that's going to happen, because we're building to a new era. Okay, what do I mean? So far, the Cold War has not yet gone hot. Okay, we've only dealt with about a 5-year period. Okay, we've talked about the origins of the Cold War, how it happens, the distrust, things like that. But now we need to actually get at when the Cold War begins to go hot. When you take all these new weapons, when you take the desire to compete with communism, and then we're going to be building up to our first proxy war, Korea, which we should talk about in a couple of lectures. So how does that even become possible? Before we can talk about the, what's going on with the Korean War, and I'll probably post some sort of documentary about that. It's not my intent to forget the Korean War, but I think sometimes documentaries can get, more into the, gritty detail of a conflict. But instead, what I want to focus on here is China. Because China is going to become, or rather I should say communist China is going to be a key player in that Korean War, making it go from, a war that should have ended by Thanksgiving 1950 after only about 5 months into a 3-year-long stalemate that gives us MASH that lasts 11 freaking years. Literally almost 4 times the length of the actual Korean War. Now, what we're going to see is, in the Chinese Civil War, it's divided into 2 factions. There's the nationalists, the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, who we have supported for quite a long time. These are the people that we've been supporting since before World War II. These are the people that, the American Volunteer Group, the famed Flying Tigers, are going to be supporting, before and just after Pearl Harbor. Now, the nationalists control most of the industry, most of the cities. They seem to be more well off. Note how I say seem. It's dictatorial. Chiang Kai-shek is far and away, he is a dictator. Okay, if you cross him, you will end up with a bullet in the back of the head. Okay, this is not a pleasant regime to live under. But because it's a dictator, we're going to see a couple of, interesting facets. One, look who supports them. Not only are we supporting them, why? Because we hate commies, but also the Germans. Okay? Look at, this picture of the Chinese Nationalist Army. Look at their helmets, German Stahlhelms. They look not that dissimilar from German troops going into Warsaw in 1939. Okay? Their rifles, they're going to use Hanyang pattern rifles, named after the Hanyang arsenal. But what are they using? The Chiang Kai-shek rifle is a license-produced German K98. Okay? They're wearing German-style uniforms with German-style helmets, carrying German-style rifles. Okay? The Germans will export Panzer Is, okay, that they don't need anymore. They'll export, them here. The Italians will export stuff. Okay? And so it's kind of one of the things about the Cold War and, the fight against communism, okay, it brings out the most unlikely of partners. What do I mean? The Germans obviously have this idea in World War II of racial superiority. Okay, they hate the Slavic people, they hate Russians, they hate Jews, they hate everybody. But yet they're going to fund Asian Chinese. But more to the point, what's interesting is from 1937, okay, even as the Germans are still funding the Chinese nationalists, the Japanese will invade. So you're going to have this kind of weird three-way interaction where the Germans are technically allied with the Japanese. They are going to fight the United States together. But the Germans are giving arms and equipment to the nationalist Chinese who are themselves fighting the Japanese. It's kind of this weird, screwed up power play with China obviously suffering in the middle. Because this is a dictatorial system, they tend to have poor leadership. Chiang Kai-shek himself may be a fantastic leader, but many of his political cronies are not. They're appointed because of their loyalty, or they're appointed because of who they know, or their power, influence, whatever, not because of their actual command ability. So what we see, this is a very much top-down sort of government that lacks any real popular support. And so they hope that, okay, maybe through actual fighting, maybe through battles, maybe through military victory, they can actually unite China. But the fact is they have none of that bottom groundswell support, and that's going to cost them. Doesn't matter how much stuff they have, okay? When Mao Zedong controls the hearts of the people, okay? When the people back Chairman Mao, okay, that's going to prove infinitely better. And so what we see is we start to talk about the communists, okay? This is kind of a map of China circa 1945. And if you look, okay, the red areas, these are the communist base areas. Technically, the nationalists have more control, okay? They have more of China. But the communists have the more, how can I put it, the more crucial parts, okay? The more coastal trading parts. And in doing so, they can help to cut off that flow of material. The communists, okay? Again, the Communist Party of China, the CCP, led by Mao Zedong. He is backed openly by the Soviets. The Soviets are willing to give any sort of aid and equipment. And though they have more equipment to give, and it's easier and quicker for them to give to the communists than it is for us to give to the nationalists. The communists had always had that popular support, but they retain it, okay, in large part because if you look, where are the Japanese areas of occupation? Where are the communist areas, okay? The communists had the ability to say, hey, we were the ones fighting the guerrilla war. We were the ones fighting against the Japanese. Yes, the nationalists did as well, but the nationalists, being out more into the West, they're not living under the thumb of Japanese occupation. The communists were. And so this gives them, if you will, a sense of legitimacy. And so it's a grassroots movement. It's very bottom up. It's popular. They have more military experience because, again, they were the ones largely fighting the Japanese. And because of this, they have guerrilla warfare experience. Despite the fact that China is freaking huge, okay, the Chinese army is anything but an organized thing. It was largely, I don't want to say the term war bands, but it was very much, I'm a general, here's my guys, you're a general, there's your guys. We might decide to cooperate. Odds are we're not, though. I'm going to go do my own thing. The communists, however, were used to fighting in a guerrilla-style fashion. They were used to fighting the Japanese. And from a military perspective, after 1945, they get all of that Japanese equipment. All those Type 96 light machine guns, all those, Type 38, Type 99 Arisaka rifles, those Type 100 submachine guns, the really, really, really crappy Japanese tanks that, okay. Those of you who take my World War II class, you know this. Japanese tanks were not that good. The Japanese believed that the rifle and bayonet, that zeal, that fanaticism for the empire, this is how you win battles. They do build some Japanese tanks, but they're not that effective. But the Chinese are able to take that in, and, for the communists, this will defeat most of the early exports. It will then take the United States sending in, modern tanks to the nationalists to try to help. But until then, the communist Chinese have an advantage. The most that we are doing, okay, is we are providing propaganda. Okay, we're linking things like, China first to fight. Hey, look, they've been fighting the Japanese since 1937. We need to help them. Or here, Uncle Sam shaking hands with the nationalist guy, revering Sun Yat-sen, who had led the revolution back in 1911. And we're saying, hey, these are the first of our allies. It's a struggling democracy. Okay. Let's also look at the time. Okay, this is let's call it 1945. Struggling towards democracy as we did 150 years ago. Okay. Literally, they're trying to link this with nearly the American Revolution. Trying to say that China is trying to found a democracy. These are the lies we tell ourselves. Okay, this is what the Cold War boils down to. It's propaganda. Okay, the Chinese, remember, especially who were supporting the nationalists, are a dictatorial government under Chiang Kai-shek. At this point, they don't care for democracy. Yes, Sun Yat-sen in 1911 absolutely did. After the Civil War breaks out in the 20s, though, it's dictator, nationalist versus communist Republicans. I mean, this is Spanish Civil War all over again. But we tell ourselves that no, because they're anti-communist, okay, then they must be democratic. Or in this case, because they're fighting against Japan, they must be democratic. We're going to, and if you look, why is there this power vacuum? The fact is, China will suffer horribly in World War II. I mean, absolutely horribly. Okay, here's an image from the Rape of Nanking, 1937, when after the Japanese seized the city, about 250,000 people are going to be killed, raped, tortured, beheaded. And again, this is targeted not against an actual military. This is not against the Chinese army, but rather this is against the Chinese civilian populace. About 14 million people dead. Okay, let's look at that. 14 million. That's less than the Soviet Union with 20 million. But that's far and away more than almost anybody else. The Japanese will use chemical warfare. They have no problem using disease and bacteria to wipe out Chinese civilian populations. They have no problem, okay, with, torture and murder of, Chinese civilians. This is a grueling thing. And what we're going to see is this makes it then where, in theory, both sides don't really want to fight anymore. The nationalists, the communists, they're exhausted. But the communists have that support. They have the sympathy because they had been fighting that guerrilla warfare. If you remember, for those of you that have taken my 1103, and if you haven't, hopefully you've learned about this, otherwise story time. Let's go back to 1898. Okay, 1898. Let's go back to the Philippines, the Spanish-American War. And the Filipinos had always seen themselves as, hey, we're the ones, we're fighting against the Spaniards. Okay, the Americans have come, the liberators, great. When the Spanish surrender, they surrender to the Americans. They snub the Filipinos, and that then spawns a war. Okay, you don't snub people politically. That's kind of a bad thing. Okay, that's kind of politics 101. That and don't bang your intern. Which, we'll deal with that later. What we're going to see, okay, is the nationalists... let's go back to 1945 in China. The nationalists get aid from the United States. We specifically target that aid, okay? Remember propaganda. Remember that, we'll help the Soviets because we have to. We're not going to really help the communists. We're going to kind of pretend they don't exist. And so when the Japanese surrender, okay, we orchestrate it so they surrender to the Kuomintang, okay? We don't want them surrendering to the communists. We don't want to make it seem like the communists are the legitimate government. And so what this has the effect of doing, okay, is creating a rift where we want China, as in nationalist China, to be the main government of China. But the communists have the support of the people. And we can see this kind of one quote that's going to dominate this course every time we talk about a proxy war or geopolitics or first, second, third world comes from Franklin Roosevelt. And it was about the Nicaraguan regime in the 1930s. That was a dictator that we were backing. Should we? No, but we were. And to quote FDR, he may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. That's the standard American mentality throughout the Cold War. Mao Zedong might be a son of a bitch, but he's going to be the American son of a bitch. We're going to, funnel in rifles, tanks, aid, helmets, all of this stuff, doing everything we can. And at Shanghai in 1945, we'll send Chief of Staff George C. Marshall to China to size up the situation, to size up, okay, what do the nationalists need? How does China rebuild? But more than that, how can we make the nationalists the main government? And this then is the goal of the Marshall Mission, to broker some sort of, I don't even want to say peace, let's say truce. I think truce is probably, the better word. How can we broker a truce between the nationalists and the communists? The fact is, it's simply not going to work. Okay. The fact is, both sides want their territorial concessions. Both sides want their aid. Both sides don't want to give up anything. And both see themselves as the legitimate government. The nationalists, well, again, we have the cities, we have the industry, we have the stuff for modern war making. But the communists said, well, no, we've been fighting the Japanese. We've been out there defending Japan, so we should be the ones who are doing this. We should be the ones who are the legitimate rulers of China. There's going to be a truce by January 46. But this isn't so much of a truce as it is, okay, hey, we've got to resupply, we've got to rearm, we've got to train new guys, because now we're not going to fight Japan. So the fact is, this war has been going on since about 1927. But in 1937, both sides have sort of an uneasy truce. Okay? It's the I hate you, you hate me, we hate that SOB a lot more, we're going to fight him. And there'll be a couple of nationalist v. communist battles throughout the war. Or it might be a case of a communist unit needs support, and the KMT is just like, yeah, we're not really going to do it. But now, with no common enemy to fight, now the nationalists, the communists, they want to figure out who's going to control China. By June, there's open war. The battles resume, both sides are fully restocked, and Marshall tries his best. Marshall tries to negotiate a settlement, but the fact is, this is a war that's been going on now for nearly 20 years. It has to be fought to its conclusion. So Marshall will be recalled on January the 21st, 1947. And then Mao Zedong, begins setting up for what he views as an eventual communist victory. The fact is, even today, the Chinese communists hail Chairman Mao as their founding father. This was the guy that puts together this revolution, that raises support, that directs the war against the Japanese. He wants reforms. He wants to bring China into the modern era. Why is this going on? Let's look a little bit at the history of China. You might want to see China as this kind of, one of the oldest civilizations on planet Earth. And it was. But by the, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, it started to fall into decay. And by the 19th century, the Chinese government, even though there is the Qing dynasty, cannot exert full control over China. So we see Europeans coming in and carving up China, much as what will happen in Africa. And spoiler alert, just as Africa will later become a Cold War battleground for that very reason, the same happens in China. We see then cases where Europeans will buy whole cities, like the French will, I believe, buy Tientsin, the Germans, Tsingtao. I remember as a kid, my grandfather, who was an airline pilot, had, this ashtray. It said Tsingtao beer. It was German stuff. Why? Tsingtao is owned by the Germans. People would own railways. The British would have, Shanghai, Hong Kong, okay, which they don't even give back to like 20 years ago. Okay. And we're going to see that they are going to extract everything they can from China. They want China for its resources. Even the United States will come in. And, we'll get the Philippines. And, it's our open door policy of, hey, we want to be able to trade in China as if we own plots of land. Okay. We're going to see the Chinese will try rebellions. Okay. 1902. Okay, or 1901, pardon me. Sorry, 1900. I've got it bracketed. 1900. We'll get the Boxer Rebellion, where the Chinese try to throw out the European missionaries. And in the Siege of Peking, you're going to have American, British, German, French, Italian, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian troops fighting together. Because it's like, hey, we might not like each other, we might have our differences, but we must protect our colonial interests. That has destroyed China. And so for Chairman Mao, his idea is to legitimately bring China into the 20th century. To have reforms where people can have jobs, have health care, have food. Okay? They don't need to worry about local warlords, that they can actually exist in a modern 20th century state. That being said, he is a ruthless leader. And again, I'm going to, throughout this course, it's my job to debunk where the commies, I might say damn commies, blah, blah, blah. They're not all bad. Okay, a lot of it is what we believed, through Cold War myth, Cold War propaganda. But some of it is true. Like Chairman Mao will literally starve out and kill 160,000 civilians at Chongqing because they don't want to subscribe to what he's wanting to do. They have pro-nationalist sympathies. They're in the communist control zone. Fine, starve them out. He wants popular support, and for him, it's some about winning hearts and minds. But the other is, if you don't support us, you can just be killed. For him, if you look at his roadmap for China, China needed to accept its place in the world. Yes, grammar Nazis, I know, it is, whatever. Okay, funny bad joke. The guy who proofread Hitler's speeches was literally a grammar Nazi. Remember that. We see that, China needed to accept that it is a rightful power. And for Chairman Mao, he believed that should be the communists. And remember, China's been rewarded with this. The UN Security Council includes China. This is China's chance. So many C's, I'm getting tongue-tied here. China's chance to exert its power and influence on the world stage. But this, he said, would ultimately lead to a U.S.-China confrontation. Chairman Mao is thinking big. He's thinking in the meta-narrative. For him, it's not simply to always remain a satellite of the Soviet Union. Chairman Mao is eventually, by the 1960s, going to say that China holds truer to what Karl Marx believed, that they are the true descendants of Marx and Lenin. And as such, there will be what we're going to call the Sino-Soviet split. And like I said, that whole concept of a bipolar world will be thrown into chaos because China wants to be the leader of international communism. That's for another day. How do we get this? How is this going to happen? The idea is, with any civil war, hearts and minds. Okay, and this is going to be something we're especially going to talk about with Vietnam. That you have to win the hearts of the civilian population. You have to get them to think like you. The Kuomintang is, again, not democratic. They're not tapping into what the people want. Okay, the people want a communist socialist government. They control the cities, but the majority of the Chinese populace lives in the rural area. Okay, they don't have any big plan other than power. Okay, not to name drop 1984, but I did just watch it, so, double plus good that I remember this. Power to them was an ends, not a means. Whereas the communists, they want reforms. Okay, they want to actually give a crap about the smaller people, the small guy, the little guy. They want to promote industry. Okay? And so it's because, the communists have that popularity boom. Why? Again, they're forward thinking, they want to focus on the populace, and they can claim to have, been fighting the Japanese for longer. The KMT just evaporates. And so by 1947 then, okay, even by then, the Civil War still has until October 49. The Kuomintang is looking to Taiwan. Okay, the island of Formosa, as it was then called. This had long been Japanese controlled. The Japanese are forced to evacuate. And the KMT says, what if we relocated there? Have a nationalist Chinese government in exile. And eventually they have to, because they start to lose the battles. And so Mao has to, Chiang Kai-shek has to withdraw. And Chairman Mao will proclaim the People's Republic of China. Spoiler alert. This should be kind of a guide for the rest of class. This is Dr. Prince's guide to testing democracy. If the nation has to tell you that it's a democratic republic or a people's republic, it is not, in fact, a republic. Okay? The communist governments will often call themselves republics, but they are controlled as an oligarchy. Okay? The idea is, well, yeah, the people have power, but it's Chairman Mao who's given the orders. Remember that. These are China Marines. These are American troops in China in the 1920s. They look very much like World War I soldiers, save for the guy with the gangster Tommy gun. And why I mention this is, understand, we've been supporting the nationalists, okay, now for nearly 20 years. And it had been because, okay, we're looking out for our own interest. In this case, it's less about supporting them as, hey, we want to protect our interest in Shanghai. Remember, those old European, colonization interests that we tried to tap into, those die quickly. But now, okay, then 1930s, World War II, we've begun supporting the KMT. And there are questions on its effectiveness. The fact is, we don't trust them. We don't trust their leaders. We know that they're horrible. So we're going to give weapons. We're going to give aid. We're going to give troops. Okay, here's a picture from Life magazine of KMT troops with American M5A1 Stuart light tanks. Okay, we're going to give troops to kind of train. We'll even send 150,000 Army guys and Marines in advisory roles. Wait. Advisor? Pay note of this when we start getting to Vietnam. That whole situation of sending aid, materiel, and then advisors that we typically think of within the 1960s, we were doing in the 1940s. But the fact is, okay, it's not enough. While this is going on in the late 40s, what are we doing? Well, that's what we've covered. Marshall Plan, rebuilding Europe, trying to figure out what to do with Germany, Berlin airlift, okay? The fact is, we are focused there. And so Stalin, who is, anxious to challenge the United States anywhere he can. Again, these are the feelers, okay, to kind of get that idea of a pushback. Where can I successfully challenge? Stalin then gives the order, green lights Mao to say, okay, go ahead, push south of the Yangtze River, take over all of China. We are supporting nationalist China, but not overwhelmingly. So with the result that, yes, our tanks are better than these. These are Japanese Shinhoto Chihakais that the communists are using. An American Stuart could knock one of these out at, 1,000 yards. They have more of them. They have better trained crews. But more than that, they actually give a crap why they're fighting. Once Taiwan is seen as an escape route, okay, once you acknowledge the possibility of defeat, these guys are going to be less likely to put their lives on the line. Whereas these guys, personally being reviewed by Chairman Mao, yeah, hell yeah, we will go and we will fight to the bitter end. And so China thus becomes lost. The Truman administration in August 1949 publishes what they call the China White Paper. And what this does is it says that only China can determine the outcome of, the Civil War. What do I mean by that? I mean that Truman, by 49, starts to say it's not up to us, okay? He's not quite going America first, but understand what are our obligations in the world, okay? Remember, this is 1949. 10 years earlier, okay, a decade earlier, we believe in the properties of isolationism. Sticking our heads in the sand and letting the world pass us by. Now we are bound with Europe. Now we're doing all this stuff where, our army is bigger than it's ever been in peacetime before. Okay, we're August 49, we're losing the nuclear monopoly. And so the question is, how far do we take that idea of containment? Do we say, literally, that everywhere in the world, okay, every place, it is our job to intervene? To put this another way, and we will be referencing it several times, and I will even post some video clips. Are we, right now, Team America, World Police? That is the question. Are we going around the world yelling, Matt Damon, Matt Damon? Is that what we're doing yet? The fact is, we don't know. So in the fall and the winter of 1949, their situation hopeless. Chiang Kai-shek and 2 million people will flee to Taiwan. I say 2 million men, that's the army. A number of civilians obviously are going to come over as well. And then in December, Taipei is proclaimed the capital of the Republic of China. Now what does this do? What does this mean? This means that the Chinese people have finally finished a war with its roots all the way back to 1911, when Sun Yat-sen was proclaimed the president of China, and there were people who didn't like it because, hey, power struggles. Okay? But what does this mean for the Cold War? Republicans, and they're going to help use this in 52 to get Eisenhower elected as president, see this as an avoidable catastrophe. That it was our job to, in fact, Matt Damon all over the planet. That it was our job to be Team America. That containment literally meant that wherever communism was going to win, we had to do everything we could to stop it. It doesn't matter, okay, if the KMT are not that good of fighters. It doesn't matter if, being a dictatorial power, they are against our founding core principles as a nation. It doesn't matter if, I just lost my train of thought. It doesn't matter if Chiang Kai-shek, again, is a dictator. It doesn't matter if this literally has nothing to do with the United States. We should stop it. And this is in part why, years later with Vietnam, we're going to get more, we're going to wade knee deep, waist high, neck deep, if you will, even, into what's effectively a Vietnamese question. Do they want to be communist or not? Because China is portrayed as an avoidable catastrophe. You're going to get stuff like this. Okay, and this is from 1942, trying to proclaim that, hey, Sun Yat-sen is just like Honest Abe Lincoln. And then this stuff's going to come up again in 49. Oh, dear God, what have we done? People saying, look at what you did. Okay, look at the fact we let this go. Never mind that, Sun Yat-sen has been dead for years. Never mind they've stopped being a democracy for like 20 years. Okay, never mind that Chiang Kai-shek is a dictator. Okay, we're going to say we let a democracy down. But then there's also how this fits into the Cold War. Okay, if this big yellow thing here is now the People's Republic of China, and this kind of teal green, whatever color it is, the Republic of China, the actual, nationalist China in new form. Okay, Cold War American foreign policy until the 1970s will be to assume that this big yellow area doesn't exist. That literally it is a black hole, that nothing exists. We're going to continue to say that China, the legitimate government of China, lives in Taiwan. It's divided in two. Okay, the Republic of China, Taiwan, is anti-communist. The People's Republic is communist. And our policy until 1979 is a one China policy. That China is the Highlander. There can be only one, and for us, that was Taiwan. We are openly hostile Why? Because we literally say their nation doesn't exist. So of course they're going to intervene in the Korean War. Why wouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? We're going to begin aid, okay, to Taiwan since the 1950s, giving them arms, equipment, advisors. 1979, okay, when we officially recognize the People's Republic of China. Then the aid becomes unofficial. But the fact is, even now, okay, even as people today are talking, oh no, Donald Trump is ticking off China, okay, the Obama administration, under the table, gave a weapons package to Taiwan because we are still supporting Taiwan even to this day. We no longer call it the Republic of China officially. Okay, we no longer want to acknowledge that it is the legitimate country, but we still want to, provide for its defense because there's always the thought, what if, China wants to reclaim its sovereign territory? So what does all of this mean? Okay, why is this so important? One, we're creating enemies that will help, fight against us in the Korean War. That's kind of a bad thing. But the other is, again, the destruction of that bipolar world narrative. Okay? Because the Soviet Union and China are going to eventually compete. We're competing then with both of them. And this produces an unstable system where the Soviet Union, okay, which is in fact politically fragile, they are going to feel the need to often overreact. So what more or less will happen is there's going to be numerous war scares. And understand, nobody actually wants to go to nuclear war. The Soviets never want to wipe us off the face of the map. We never want to wipe them off the face of the map. But because the Soviets tend to overreact, that will then lead to problems, okay? Because the Soviets overreact because they have to make sure that they are seen as superior to the Chinese. That looks threatening to us, and then so we respond in kind. This shatters what could have been a nice, stable narrative for preventing peace. I know it's a little short today. It's only going to be about 38 minutes. I have some supporting videos, some supporting newsreels I'm going to post that I'd like you to watch as well. But what we're going to see then is now the conditions are in place to begin the first proxy war. But before we begin the proxy war, for the next lecture, what I want to do is the final component is now we need nuclear weapons. We need lots of them. We need to be able to blow the world to hell. And the reason is because that will make any proxy war have the ability to spiral out of control. Even humble Korea, which we typically don't think could lead to nuclear war, okay? Douglas MacArthur will call for the deployment of atomic bombs against China, and that's just a bad day for everyone. So sorry there's not that many jokes. I'm not, that much of an Asian historian, so I kind of have to keep it to what I know, but, hey, once we get to nukes, I got a lot of funny material and a lot of scary material. So on that note, take it easy, guys, and I will see you in the next video.